have 10 to 15 minutes of questions and comments for the information you've just heard about, but then that will be followed by a general Q&A session to encompass all the presentations you've heard. So I have some questions on the Slido, but does anyone from the floor have a question they would like to pose?
Question for Pam. I know that you have scenarios, predictive scenarios for tree species, and for a certain meadow community type. The aquatic stuff sort of goes down to 10 centimetre threshold. I wonder, is that linked in any way to any specific communities or species?
Probably a question for Cedric, who did the work. You get a much more sensible answer, or more knowledgeable answer.
Yeah, it's kind of obviously, it's a rough number, but it's usually big fish, 10 centimeters, they get stuck. As simple as that. So I'm not pretending it's like extremely sophisticated, but it gives you the right sort of picture. And as part of the full analysis, actually, we are looking at values threshold or no threshold at all. It could be like 5, 10, 12 centimeters, 21. We could argue endlessly on this, but 10 centimeters, good, back on the envelope threshold.
Thank you, Henry.
I was wondering, in the economic impacts, it showed that depending on how you sort of shared out the water, you've got different economic impacts. I wonder whether there was thoughts of how that linked to the question of institutions around managing drought and buying it, because I think in a drought scenario, a sense of fairness obviously is sort of key probably to people sort of responding to it. So does that mean that you get different scenarios in different places, or one scenario is more likely to sort of keep that sort of shared ownership of the problem, if you like?
Yeah. And in addition, just as the agricultural researchers have made the case that is a very useful, worthwhile economic value for us, we shouldn't negate the often hidden environmental aspects as well, if we're going to be fair and equitable. So, Chris, would you like to comment on that?
I mean, I think how we focused the scenario testing, we could have come up with lots of different scenarios, and we may yet still. At the moment, we're just focused on 5. The first one is one, which is, if you like, everybody is in it together, and we think that's the label we use, so everybody takes their share. Another one tries to preserve agriculture for reasons that Laura and Ian talk about. But in a way, we've been a bit agnostic. So in other sense, we're sort of saying, look, if you want to preserve the economy, if you want to keep GDP at a particular level, then this is a management choice. Yes, it's going to have impacts, there are going to be losers, but that is a trade-off there that's on the table in one sense or another. I mean, clearly, in reality, I think these considerations will feature in those who are making these choices about fairness and impacts and social impacts, etc., environmental impacts. But I think what we're tracing through is a whole series of what will happen, what if you make these management choices.
Any more responses from the panel? In which case, I'll pick this
up. Mike Scorr from HDP. It's a linked question. Laura picked up on the value for primary production for primary culture. I'm just wondering whether your analysis is focusing on primary production or it's taking into account the agriculture and food supply chain within your analysis.
Our analysis is based on the national accounts, so it feeds through the inputs and outputs. So it picks up on the production of agriculture both as an output but also as an input to other activities within the economy. So it is captured implicitly in a modelling framework.
Okay.
Could I have like 2 words on what's been assumed about the demand side for the far future scenarios? Population, industrial makeup, are the same crops being grown? Just the basics.
To be determined, I suppose, is the answer. We haven't got quite to the point where we're integrating that, but the assumption is, I suppose, a very static demand side, and you're absolutely right. I mean, things will change in the future, and you will have different behaviours and different composition of the economy, etc. But I think, as Jim said earlier, we're dealing with what we have at the moment in terms of the supply side and the input, etc. But hopefully the framework is one that is robust enough to allow for those sorts of changes and behavioural changes to be incorporated.
Okay, question from Slido on the agricultural aspect. So irrigation management strategies, with the potential resetting of subsidies with agriculture, what potential is there to use these to help manage drought or drought management?
Well, I believe all these subsidies, if we think about how the common agricultural policy is giving subsidies to farmers, and those subsidies are linked to some environmental friendly activities that they need to do at the farm level, I think the UK has a chance now to design those subsidies in a way that will encourage farmers to use water in a more sustainable way. So that could help to trigger some behavioral change in the sector. But it's a bit difficult question. But
Any question? Okay, I'm going to ask a question from Slido then. This may have been touched on already, but it would be worth explaining a bit more. Is it possible for the various water resource, water quality models to indicate the sort of circumstances that would pose unacceptable risks with regard to obstruction from cooling?
So, yes, is the short answer. That's what we're putting this whole setup together to do. And so the setup that exists, just to recap, is to have this large ensemble of possible weather and climatic conditions that is propagated through the hydrological modelling, and that's used to predict the frequency of low flows and how that might change in the future. And then by looking at the abstraction licensing arrangements to see the frequency with which drought impacts on cooling water abstractions might occur in the future. The layer to put on top of that is the role of uncertainty in all of that, both with respect to the climatic conditions, the fact that the hydrology of low flows is very tricky, and that we don't have all that many observations. And also I'd add, it also matters a great deal what else is going on in the catchment, given that the cooling water abstractions tend to be lower down in the catchment. So there's a lot of uncertainty in there, but that is what we're trying to do, and I think that's the direction of travel of the science, is that we will have a much better grip on the likelihood of cooling water restrictions across the country.
Okay. I've got a question.
Like I said, there was a hand away, so I thought it was there before.
Yeah, I was going to ask on the agriculture, you put a slide up of the risk of different parts of the country being under restrictions. I just wondered how you defined the risk of the regulators implementing restrictions, and whether there's anything that the policy can learn from how you make that definition.
yeah. So well, the maps that I saw were part of the study that we have done. We have all the maps with different levels of restriction, because in section 57 you have 3 levels of restriction, and that map was showing the probability of being under restriction 1 day or more in a year under level 1 restrictions, but also we have looked at level 2 and level 3 restrictions. So that's the way we have done it. So using those maps also were using the future flows, climate and hydrology data sets that were produced by the CEH a few years ago, and the idea is to repeat the analysis with the Marius event set, and we are doing that at the moment.
Just picking up on that, as Lola said, what we were using in that analysis were the sort of the published criteria within the drought management plans for the different levels of restrictions. As they're published, they do allow the regulator to have some wriggle room, as you probably know. And I think one of the things that Lola touched on was the work that we did actually talking to farmers and regulator representatives within Anglian region, was actually how in the 2010 to 12 drought, how the sort of the better relationships that have developed between the agricultural sector and the Environment Agency in that region, through agriculture doing its part through increased efficiency and better scheduling. The way that the rules actually allowed the agency to not impose mandatory restrictions in situations where they could have done, because they were aware that actually, there are significant economic impacts to the sector and downstream of those restrictions. And there was a much more collaborative approach in that drought that wasn't there even sort of 10 years ago. So I think that there's multiple aspects to learn, which we can't represent in that modelling, but we represented in other parts of the research.
Thank you. There's a question on Slido again about agriculture, asking, will the regional models that have been developed expand out to Wales and Scotland?
So, in the work that we're currently doing, the work that was, the maps that Lola showed were based on the Future Flows project outputs, just because of the timing of things. Our intention is that we're in the process of repeating it with the grid-to-grid outputs that Vicky showed earlier, which cover the whole country. Now, obviously, irrigation has a spatially variable importance across the country, but the plan is to cover Wales and Scotland.
Hugo.
Yeah, it's about the economic assessment. If I understand correctly, it was based on input-output analysis. Input-output analysis, I think, should capture the average value of water. Let's say, when in case of a drought, should be more of a marginal value. For example, the risk of losing a crop that is really ready for agriculture, for power generation, should be a risk of a blackout for the country or something like that. That is getting much more different from the average contribution of GDP on the cubic meter of water under normal circumstances. In my understanding, I'm not an economist.
I mean, the tables are based on actual production data, so they're collected by the ONS and they're put in there. So they're actual input and output measured in pounds. So they're not an average, they're aggregate. I mean, they're total figures, if you like. The coefficients are fixed in input-output tables of how much one sector contributes to the other.
Okay, I have a contribution to GDP and the water consumption. And I use the contribution to GDP for cubic meter under normal circumstances. If I am in drought condition, the value of the water is order of magnitude different from this average contribution.
Well, exactly. So what? I mean, that's one of the inputs to the model. So when we've got these reductions in drought, so the estimates of how much water is going to be reduced in the drought, we feed that through into the model through some relationship between the changing water availability and the amount that's available to a particular sector, say electricity or whatever. So there's a direct model that captures the elasticity, if you like, of water used to production. So that's captured in the modeling framework. So we get Mohammed gives me an estimate of how much water is going to go down. That feeds into the elasticity estimate, which feeds into the input-output model.
Thank you. I'm going to now close this particular session.